books.
That's right, Betsy. As you know, there's some deep research going on that we're sharing on both sides of the bridge of the glass bead game about blood relics, the spear of destiny, the lance of love, and we're now finding that we need something to explain what the Holy Grail really is. And so instead of writing intelligence reports, because we've basically exhausted most avenues that we can think of, we continue to do our research, but we are now building a little bit on the other side of the bridge for those who are interested in the consciousness end of things.
I'll leave a link in the description box below. If you want to follow our research into what we call the Holy Lance of Love, we've left a page open and you can follow the research just as we did, kind of uncovering it in an Indiana Jones type of way. And then your book, I understand, is going to be looking at the archaeomythology, the religion, we're looking at something that's never been looked at before. It's the Grail Queens. What are the Grail Queens?
Well, Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Mary Cleopas, and the other Marys, and John the Beloved, of course, received these blood relics from underneath the cross. You know, the pieces of the cross, the nails, the Grail, the vials, the sponges, the spear of Longinus. All of these things were sacred and held by then the females, the feminine line of Christianity. And we have shown, as we were looking for the provenance, the hand-to-hand passing down of the spear of Antioch, we came across what seems to be an absolutely amazing thing. And that's that there is a very long line of Grail Queens who took on certain vows and went into monasteries while their husbands, the king, went off into the crusade, or their sons, and then they took care of the relics. And this is very clear in history, but for some reason many people have missed it. So we're trying to bring out really the lineage and the provenance of the Grail Queens all the way from the moment of the crucifixion until now.
Right, because we do want to keep making progress as we uncover truth, no matter where it lies. Well, let's get started today on the Trump tweets. It's September 11th, 2018, and the first tweet of the day is a quote from Sarah Carter and Lou Dobbs. "We have found nothing to show collusion between President Trump and Russia, absolutely zero, but every day we get more documentation showing collusion between the FBI and the DOJ, the Hillary campaign, foreign spies, and Russians. Incredible." What do you make of that?
Well, first off, it's an honor to do the T-clearance drops and attempt to decode them, because T-clearance is the highest clearance. Only Trump knows what is in Trump's mind, but we try to figure it out. And so as he's quoting Lou Dobbs and Sarah Carter, two people who oftentimes speak a great deal of the truth, they may not have the full picture nor go quite as far as some people will to stick their neck out and put it on the chopping block. So what we want to say is, yes, that is true what this quote says, but it also doesn't point out that, again, we have multiple senators and Congress people, the chairman of different committees, demanding a new special investigation looking at the Democrat side of this nonsense. Because there is no such thing as conspiracy to collude. So there is no collusion. Rat Rodenstein has already said it over and over again. No collusion, no corruption, no obstruction, no conspiracy, nothing. And Trump, in fact, is not a target of their investigation, which is not an investigation. It is a CIA Black Ops, John Brennan started counterintelligence operation cloaked under national security, which went after candidate Trump, Trump-elect, and President Trump. And it's still going on. So what we see in the mainstream media is, oh, Carter Page gets 14 daes in prison for lying under his indictment. That is a joke.
Carter Page, I thought was George Papadopoulos.
I'm sorry, Georgie Papadopoulos. I'm seeing his little face. I was thinking about, all the love affairs he had. Now his wife comes out in defense of him. George.
Okay.
George had multiple love affairs that were set up by Stephen Halpern with his own secretary.
Well, he's a handsome little guy. Did
Yes,
you
he
see
is.
his picture?
Michael Gaeta and Joseph Mifsud, who is still missing no matter what his friend says. Joseph Mifsud is still missing. There's been no word.
Now, let's back up there, because in one of our recent audios, we reported that the DNC had reported in court that Mifsud was dead. But since then, that seems not to be the case, although nobody can identify where he is.
Right. So we pointed out that he was ordered to go into secrecy, and then the man who ordered him says, "Oh no, I'm in contact with him," but you're not going to be in contact with him. And the man who reports he's still alive was not in contact with him. And he says that in his reports to the press. But anyway, each time the left, the Democrats, the Robert Mueller supporters get another piece of, an indictment on Georgie Papadopoulos, 14 days in prison, or Paul Manafort is put in solitary confinement and indicted for crimes that happened 5 years before he was working in the Trump team. Papadopoulos, 14 days for nothing. He comes out and now he can speak out. And so Papadopoulos is saying, I was framed, I was set up by Stephen Halper, who was an agent of America. He was paid $400,000 to frame me. And everyone knows this. We got the records. We've revealed it. Many people in the press have revealed it. So what we have here is the mainstream media going just absolutely bonkers every time they think that Robert Mueller has a victory, which then in their small minds, and I mean very small, they may not even have minds, but if they had two neurons that were connected, then perhaps they could remember that the people investigating it said there was, that would be Rod Rosenstein and Mueller, said there was no collusion, obstruction. There's nothing. So why does the mainstream media keep blathering like idiots that every time something raises its head up like whack-a-mole, boom, it gets knocked down because of the truth, but it keeps coming back up?
Well, that's because they have to keep their brainwashing going so that at the midterms, maybe there's a hope and a prayer for a blue wave. And that's what they're doing right now. And I'm very disappointed that folks at Fox News aren't drilling down deeper. I mean, I keep saying if two retired school teachers can give you this much truth, and the evidence that we have in our citizen intelligence reports is just truly amazing. If we can do that, why can't these paid media folks, and of course we know the answer to that, do something more than a little, swimming at the shallow end of truth?
Well, that's because they don't want to be taken off the air, and they're the only voice on the Republican side, or even the middle ground, and they are warred against all the time, just like Breitbart. But again, Breitbart is not really MAGA, and Fox News, some of the people are MAGA, but remember, some of those people were against Trump at different times. So what we have here is a mainstream media that is so messed up that we are in a war, and until that war takes the mainstream media down, the battles are going to rage. And to answer the inherent question in what you said earlier, the next tweet gives us a chance to do that.
So we're going to move into the 9/11 memorials, these tweets here, and we have a lot to say about that. We did do a citizen intelligence report a while back that takes the work of E.P. Heidner and looks at what really happened at 9/11. I do have that in the link below. The tweet reads, #NeverForget, September 11th. Retweet from Dan Scavino Jr. President Donald J. Trump signs a proclamation at his desk in the Oval Office designating Patriot Day 2018 to honor the memories of the nearly 3,000 lives lost on September 11, 2001, and of every hero who has given their life since that day to protect our safety and our freedom.
We will not forget, and I'm going to help you remember. Let's look at the criminals who right now are attempting a coup d'etat against our sitting president, a duly elected sitting president who was elected by a landslide, by the way. Comey. Where was Comey at that time? Well, first off, let's go to Mueller. Where was Mueller on 9/11? Well, he had just been made the head of the FBI. But he didn't take the office after he was given the job for a few weeks because he said he had an appendicitis operation. Isn't that cute? So on 9/11, he wasn't in his office so that he could have an alibi that he wasn't even on the job yet. But let's remember what happened afterwards. The 9/11 Commission was basically completely supported and ran by Robert Mueller. They never looked at any evidence. They didn't look at the free fall of Building 7. They didn't look at the free fall into its perfect imprint, its footprint. They didn't look at the fact that the World Trade Centers had already been condemned because of the asbestos and they needed to be taken down. And Silverstein, the man who came in, made a fortune off of them by getting multiple insurance policies just a short time before. But that's not what it's about. What it was about was there were many people involved in this, okay? So Mueller came in and was appointed the head of the FBI to cover up their crimes. The crimes were, of course, directed, as we know, by certain agents of the Saudi intelligence community. Now, let's remember at that time, King George Bush, H.W. Bush, Daddy Bush, was living more than half of the time in the palace of King Saud in Saudi Arabia. It was inside of that same palace that John Brennan had set up and actually had signed 12 of the 19 expedited visas for the people who were accused of attacking on 9/11, who were from Saudi Arabia. Now, we've heard about the 28 missing pages where Cheney basically wouldn't let George Baby Bush say a word without him being there. He literally told him he could not testify without him, interrupted him throughout most of it, and barely let him speak. Why? Because he was Baby Bush, from the time he was elected until 9/11, had more days off on vacation down there on his ranch, cleaning up the brush on his tractor, than all other presidents in history in their entire 8 years.
Well, they needed him out of the way so this elite financial cabal could set up this whole 9/11 false flag. And Cheney was one of the ringleaders.
And Cheney, of course, ran the operation that day, which, of course, an unprecedented amount of Air Force exercises, war games, where they supposedly sent every plane that had any munitions on it to Alaska. That is what Cheney told the 9/11 Commission in the report. It states this. And the 28 pages that were missing when they came out, then it became legal to sue Saudi Arabia for the deaths of the people who lost their relatives on 9/11. But what was really going on, $280 billion in Durham Brady bonds had been faked and created out of nothing. And the Bush and the Vulcans had used them to basically give to oligarchs in Russia to economically crash Russia's economy. This was done when he was the vice president under Reagan. The first time it was done when he was the president himself by the same group of people we call the Vulcans. Now, I can go into all of that, but the point is, those were economic concerns. There were 15 investigations going on that in the FBI and CIA, well, FBI particularly in the Department of Justice, that had been moved to new offices in the tower that was first struck. As a matter of fact, those offices blew up, and there were firemen on the scene trying to put out flames, and the 2 floors of the FBI's office blew up, and no one wants to talk about this. So there were firemen in the building in the first tower that was struck by the plane at that exact moment trying to put out a fire because they had blown up the records. Those records concerned gold, what we call, well, it's called the Yamashita gold, or it's called the Hammer Project, where the Bush family, CIA, rogue family, Daddy Bush. Let's remember, Daddy Bush was the head of the CIA before he became the president. And he was part of killing John F. Kennedy. And he was very much part of hiding the truth during the Warren Commission, just as much as he was hiding the truth during the 9/11 Commission. But Mueller was there. He was in charge, and he found nothing. He didn't notice Tower 7 collapsed into its footprint. He didn't notice the missing amounts of gold out of Building 6. He didn't notice anything.
His job was not to notice, not to pay attention, and not to give citizens an honest report, because he's covering for these criminal elites, just as he's doing right now. So he's doing the same thing now that he did at 9/11.
And with Benghazi, and with Noriega,
yes,
and with Fast and Furious.
He's a cover-up guy.
I can't even list all of them, but he was there to cover the trail, exactly as you said. He's a DC fixer, one of the most criminal lawyers on the face of the earth. That's what he was doing. Now, what was John Brennan doing? As I said, he signed 12 of the 19. Now, remember, he became a radicalized Islamic Muslim when he was the head of the Riyadh station in CIA. After he was the head of a station, though he had never been an agent, he had never developed an asset, he had never done anything. And during the time in 1996, that's when there was the bombing of the Kohar Towers. He was responsible for that. So that bombing set him up to help with the bombing of 911. Because remember, there were bombs that went off in the basement of both towers before the planes hit, as well as bombs that went off in the CIA floors. And they were already called in and being responded to. And people, the only thing we know about 911 for sure is that almost nothing they told us in the official story is true. Now, Brennan, where was he at that time? He had just moved over to the CIA and become head of a new department called Threat Analysis, Terrorism Threat Analysis. In other words, they set him up to be the guy in charge of everything from the moment of 911, because after that moment, all the 15 investigations that implicated the Bushes and many others in their criminal activities all were set aside, and the only focus was terrorism. And John Brennan and the CIA was in control of that, because the attack on our domestic shores, on our domestic land, was supposed to be investigated by the FBI. As we just said, no investigation was done.
But in the background, we have the young Brett Kavanaugh working for Bush, preparing the Patriot Act.
And remember, that's right, preparing it ahead of time, because it couldn't have been written in the moment that it was created. It was already written ahead of time, and so Kavanaugh was part of that. We'll go to where Comey was in a minute, but let's back up for a second, because when Bush was in the King Saud's palace, about 65 or more % of the time after he left the White House and joined the Carlyle Group, which basically was the greatest militaristic group of companies ever in history, and he went from being a millionaire to a billionaire in 1 year. He also opened Barrick Gold, a fake gold company, but he was also in the palace of King Saud at that time receiving presidential intelligence reports, which is illegal, but he was the first person in history ever to do that. First president in history. So he had to build a SCIF, a secure compartmental information facility, inside of the palace of the very people who attacked us on 9/11, and no one wants to say anything about this. So he received the intelligence reports. Now his son was out clearing brush in Texas on his tractor and falling off of it at that time, but Daddy Bush was reading the intelligence reports because it clearly told him whether or not what they were doing was being found out and propagated throughout the intelligence community, which it was. There were reports that said Islamic terrorists planned to attack the World Trade Center with planes. That was given to George Baby Bush over and over again, but since he wasn't in his office, he didn't know.
Yeah, but
he didn't
that's
care.
Not really what happened. So were these kind of bogus reports to keep people off guard what was really going on there?
No, they were making fun of us. There were pictures of planes flying into the World Trade Center that were printed weeks before it happened. There was a truck that had a picture of a plane flying into the World Trade Center that was driven by Israelis that were picked up that had a bomb in it. They were trying to get it across the George Washington Bridge, and they couldn't get it into the city, and it was confiscated, and no one wants to talk about that. But let me talk about one thing that other people will never talk about. Who would be the person that would be necessary to cover all of these things? That would be the U.S. Attorney in charge of the Southern District of New York, right? That's where it happened. Who was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York at that time? James Comey. So we have James Comey, John Brennan, and Robert Mueller covering. And they are now the same criminals doing these activities because they are the fixers. They are the biggest lawyer criminals who fly under the false flag of law enforcement. And it is all being revealed. And today, as we remember the criminal activities of our own domestic enemies in our own domestic borders against ourselves, who also used, of course, the Israelis, and they used the Saudi Arabians, and they used the Pakistani intelligence, and they used the Five Eyes, particularly Canada and Britain. And I could go into all of that, but nobody can tell you the full story. I can tell you that. I can tell you that there's one book that tells you the economic story, and that's where we did a condensation of that book, E.P. Heidner's book on 911, 385 pages of dense material that is all evidence and proof of everything I just said. And I'm not going to get into the weeds because then it gets very speculative.
Get out. But if folks are interested, just check that link below. And I know people will chime in and go, oh, it wasn't planes that hit the building and it was this and it was that. Well, folks, we know all of this. It's in our report, but an audio of this length can't go into all this depth. Now,
there's been research done, and if you follow the Truther group, unfortunately, they keep being derailed by their own members. But there was a group that on their own got together with the engineers, almost every engineer in America, that blows these buildings up and have them do free fall into their own footprint, controlled demolition. They all say Tower 7 was a controlled demolition. From that evidence alone, and they give amazing amounts of evidence, the case has to be opened, and so they have already put in basically a lawsuit to reopen the investigation of 911 that the FBI did not do under Robert Mueller.
Because if we think for 1 minute that buildings can just free fall and collapse, and our architects and engineers need to get to the bottom of this so that you're not in a building that just free falls one day.
From fires, office fires, though really there was no reason to have any office fires in Tower 7. And let's remember, we have the tapes. We have the tapes, and the tapes show that they go and they tell the firemen, do not put the fires out. And then the firemen still go in Tower 7, and they say these are fires have been set. And they've been set near the windows, and they're not really fires. They're actually fires in trash bins. They're paper fires, and they're going, get out of the building. The building is going to collapse. The building is not going to collapse. And the firemen get in an argument. Finally, they clear the building, and after having 2 sets of specialized people in non-uniforms go into the building to clear the building, you see them exiting the building, and the chief person standing there talking to them says, is the building clear? Yes. Is the building clear? You're certain? Every person has gone from the building. Yes. Okay, pull it. Boom. Boom, boom, the building falls.
Now, Thomas,
pull it means exactly what they say when they have a controlled demolition.
So let's, we got Comey, Mueller, Brennan, Cheney, Bush, and the list goes on. But let's go back to Lindsey Graham asking Brett Kavanaugh about when military tribunals can be used. Would any of these people that we've named be subject to this kind of military court system?
Each and every one of them, because it was not only an attack on those people, it was a national security event, the largest one in our history on domestic grounds, and it was planned. It was a conspiracy. It used the military. It used certain companies. I could name them, but I'm not going to go into that. And it used intelligence and assets from foreign countries. This was a domestic and a foreign attack on our shores to basically bring globalism in under the lying auspices of terrorism, under the same liars who gave us weapons of mass destruction, under the same liars who gave us the lie that there was a reason to attack Iraq in the first place when Daddy Bush attacked Iraq. That was all a setup. So what we have here is one false flag after the next. This one was for the sake of starting what they call the long war on terrorism, which will never end. They admit that. We are in a state of war at all times now, and we can never get out of it because of 911 saying that Saddam Hussein was part of Al-Qaeda. There was no Al-Qaeda whatsoever in Iraq at that time. They were actually enemies. Al-Qaeda was created by Donald Rumsfeld in Afghanistan to fight the Russians there because they wanted to put a pipeline through Afghanistan, which still to this day is not happening. Plus, the CIA gets a great deal of their rogue CIA money from the opium that is traded there and brought in through our southern border. Everybody knows this. We have pictures. As a matter of fact, weeks after 911, well, probably a month or so after 911, National Geographic came out with video footage of the supposed 19 Islamic Al-Qaeda terrorists. Some of them were basically training in Afghanistan. And in some of those films, they show those individuals sitting down with Osama bin Laden himself. So they have supposedly video that tracks these people all the way from the time they were trained as Al-Qaeda, which means that Al-Qaeda is a name given by the CIA. It's called the List. Those were the list of their terrorists. Those were the ones that they thought they could trust in the fight against Russia. And they're the ones we armed them. Rumsfeld armed them. I could go into this in great detail, but the point is, these criminals, a military indictment for treason and then suffer whatever it is that is the consequences, which could be hanging, shooting,
yes,
life imprisonment, whatever.
These people, in a measured and a calm way, these are enemies of the United States people. They have committed atrocious crimes on our soil. Names that we know, Comey and Mueller and Brennan and Bush, common names we know.
There is terrorism. There is radical terrorism. And it's ran by the very people who are the heads of our law enforcement. It's ran by DOJ, the Secretary of State. It was ran by Hillary Clinton. It was ran by Eric Holder. It was ran by Loretta Lynch. These are criminals. And these people were completely complicit at that time with 911 because it was impossible not to be complicit. It was impossible not to be complicit. And don't get me into the details of this because it upsets me a great deal. But if you read our intelligence report, you will see that we have provided the indictable evidence to go after those people. And now that there has been a lawsuit saying there must, demanding another investigation, another 911 investigation, all of these things will come out very, very quickly because people have done a lot of work to bring the evidence forth, but it has been ignored by the FBI, the Department of Justice, because we see the criminality that works between them.
Well, what we've shown you is that Hillary Clinton basically has the digital keys to the FBI, so nothing's going to happen there because she's controlling that.
Yes, and the FBI has the 33,000 missing emails that they were trying to bait George Papadopoulos with because they were handed over to Comey. So Comey had them all along, plus the NSA had them all along, plus a second courtesy message was sent on every one of them to China. So China had all of them all along, all 700,000 of them.
All right, moving on to the next tweet. News front page text reveal media leak strategy. So terrible and nothing is being done at DOJ or FBI, but the world is watching and they get it completely.
Well, the court of public opinion doesn't hang people. And as you say, people need to meet justice instead of fake justice. So let's go into the media leak strategy. Yes, it's more than a strategy. It was institutionalized. We have Comey with his friend Daniel Richman literally on the payroll as a leaker. And we do nothing. Okay? We have James Wolfe leaking to Ali Watkins. Top secret FISA information, but only the stuff she wanted to print, which was supposedly damnable of Trump. What happens? Well, nothing. What happens with Andrew McCabe? Oh, secretly, they impanel a grand jury, and mark my words, they are not going to convict him. Now, a grand jury can convict a ham sandwich. That's the phrase that they always use. Because you have no way of getting out of it. That's the reason Trump doesn't really want to go before a rigged grand jury questioning, which you can't even take your lawyer into. And it's just rigged. All they want to do is get you saying two things, two different words for one thing. That's it. That's all they need. One word, one single word. That's what they got George Papadopoulos on. He simply downplayed his association with Joseph Mifsud, who is, by the way, missing. Now, we can speculate where Joseph Mifsud is, but better than that, what we really need to do is look very, very carefully at what is going on. When Trump so much as demanded with his tweets of Jeff Sessions to please investigate these leaks because they're so fantastic. Andrew McCabe, Lisa Page and Strzok were talking about Andrew McCabe and Carlin and Baker, and they're literally institutionalized leaking. And in these messages, it says, oh, let's leak it. And then later they say, oh, that was good. It really got a lot of attention. Oh, my gosh, it went out very quick. Oh, your guy, Devlin, he's just marvelous. Devlin. We love Devlin. Oh, let's give some more to Devlin. I mean, it's unbelievable. It is so clear, the leaks. Every one of those leaks is a national security violation, which carries incredible consequences, especially since Strzok was a CIA counterintelligence operative working for the FBI and counterintelligence, manipulating the Department of Justice National Security Division and the Secretary of State. Strzok was manipulating everything. Wherever he went, he was in charge. He got to do whatever he wanted. He didn't even, as I told you, he didn't need FISA warrants. He wrote national security letters. I've said this all along. The only reason they ever got that FISA warrant, which they probably all really regret now, and all they did is put in an application. There was no hearing. Okay, so they were acting on it anyway. But when it comes down to it, the leaks are institutionalized, and Michael Horowitz was given the charge by Jeff Sessions to look into leaks. That would be at that moment as he was revealing supposedly what he found, which were no indictments concerning politicalization of the DOJ and FBI. He found nothing, no indictments. Then he was appointed Huber. Oh, good old SES Huber to come along so that he can help for indictments. Well, Huber's been taking a nap the whole time because he's done absolutely nothing. There have been no indictments. And Andrew McCabe is not being indicted for leaks. He's being indicted for lying over and over and over and over again. Leaks? Nope. Oh, no. Institutionalized leaks? Yes, yes. Andrew McCabe? Yes. Is that going to come up in the grand jury hearing with him? No. What's going to not come up also is the fact that Michael Horowitz is doing nothing more than slow walking this over a cliff. If he can't find leakers and indict them, then he is nothing more than a fake. He is nothing more than another person who belongs in that little group with Mueller, Comey, John Brennan, Andrew McCabe, Christopher Wray, and the rest of those criminals. I think we counted 36 of them. If those 36 go down for their conspiracy for this coup d'etat, Washington will be cleaned up for decades to come.
And there are still people out there. They have their own derangement syndrome about Jeff Sessions. They continue to say that Jeff Sessions and Mueller and Trump are playing some 64-dimensional chess, and he's going to come out as a white hat as well as Horowitz and Huber.
That's complete silliness. I will use the word silliness instead of the other words that come to mind. No, take Trump for what he's saying. Now, you got to read between the lines in some cases, but he's very, very consistent. He has said what he was going to do. He has done what he said he was going to do. By the second year, against every oppositional force that could be raised by money or hatred or greed or any of the seven deadly sins, we have every single person going after him that is guilty of a crime, because why? He's bringing the rule of law, which means they go down and their stream of money and their rat lines get closed.
The next tweet is a quote from Lou Dobbs. Eric Holder could be running the Justice Department right now, and it would be behaving no differently than it is.
Well, Eric Holder was a total criminal. He still is now. Let's remember Fast and Furious. He was in contempt of Congress. He refused to give them the evidence. And after 7 years, when the statute of limitation was ended, now that material's coming out, but we can't bring charges against him. This is the same guy working for Obama still, and he's out gerrymandering districts so that you can use illegal aliens in the census as the population for districts. That's worse than gerrymandering. That is just, again, full outright illegality. And fake justice is what it should be called. The fake Justice Department, because there is no justice going on there right now, except in the court of public opinion, where these idiots get out and say these stupid things that show their crimes, and they admit it, and they actually create evidence against themselves continually because they are part and parcel of Trump derangement syndrome.
The next tweet is Rudy Giuliani. Did a great job as mayor of New York City during the period of September 11th. His leadership, bravery, and skill must never be forgotten. Rudy is a true warrior. Whoa, that one really has me by surprise, Thomas, because from what I look at, Rudy had to have known that 9/11 was going down. I can't see that he couldn't have possibly known about the Port Authority, the issues, and everything. But Trump says he's a true warrior.
I remember hearing the calls to the Port Authority about the explosions in the offices above and below when the calls came in 911 to the Port Authority. And then later you hear Rudy Giuliani saying that he had moved his FEMA headquarters and his emergency preparedness headquarters for New York City into Tower 7. He point blank said that, and he said it repeatedly. Well, then why did the calls come to the Port Authority instead of to the Emergency Preparedness Center and the new hub, the new information communication hub of the New York Police and Giuliani's FEMA, emergency preparedness, everything. And that day, remember, the only video we have of the first plane striking the towers is a FEMA camera that somebody had bumped so that it was pointing up and looking at the first tower at an extremely oblique angle, while the FEMA people doing the FEMA exercise, which you can see because they're filming them.
And like we trust FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security on any of this false flag stuff. Oh, add the FBI to that list too.
Which means that all the emergency groups were all prepared and out that day. And all ready. They were actually standing there below the towers in front of Tower 7. And I'm going to repeat that. The only film we have, which is probably completely fake, of the first plane hitting the first tower, was accidentally filmed by a FEMA camera that was filming the FEMA exercise that day, that they'd gone on a break and the cameraman had bumped the camera and it happened to go up and be pointed at that exact spot. That's where we get the only picture. The other pictures we have, the second plane striking the second tower, none of them are the same. Take a close look at them, folks. That plane is black. That plane is a projected holographic image in some of the films that we see. That plane is certainly not a passenger plane. That plane would have had its wings fall off had it had such shear force flying into that tower.
But let's get back to Rudy Giuliani.
Oh, Giuliani knew that it was happening that day because he cleared Tower 7 and he used the Port Authority as his headquarters. Okay? So right there we catch him in the hugest lie we can. We catch him not really there at the moment when he would have been, completely wiped out by the dust and all the things that came from the towers in their free fall, in their controlled demolition. So he has great pictures of himself being a hero, doesn't he? But he doesn't explain anything. And anything he's ever explained about it was so vague, it's like a politician just explaining it. So Rudy Giuliani was either a completely duped person, completely complicit, or one of the largest useful idiots ever created in history. And let's remember, Mueller and Rudy know each other very well. That's the reason Rudy has squared off with Mueller and is basically taking him down to size and using his own tricks against him. So Rudy Giuliani is a shark among sharks, and I don't know that I would trust him with anything.
Okay, so Trump is tweeting that he's departing Washington, D.C. to attend a Flight 93 September 11th memorial service in Shanksville, Pennsylvania with Melania. And there's a picture of them leaving. They're on the grounds of the White House. And really, people still believe there was a flight there? I mean, come on. I mean, everything shows that there was no plane that crashed into that area.
The coroner, in the first pictures we have, and in the first pictures we have is accidentally a reporter got there and started interviewing witnesses who said that it was basically a very, very small, looked like maybe a cruise missile or some kind of little thing that crashed. And then a bunch of trucks showed up and then disappeared by the time he could get to the site. Okay? Trucks showed up to where that little thing hit the ground, right? So the coroner shows up and he comes out, and the first thing he says is you can see the coroner walk over, because this same reporter is reporting this, and he says this is the coroner, shows him walking over. The coroner walks over to the hole, looks around, walks back towards his car, and the reporter says, "Why are you leaving?" He goes, "Yes." "Why?" "My job is done here." "Why?" "There are no dead bodies. There are body parts strewn about. I will have nothing to do with this." That's what happened that day. Now, what else happened? Let's remember, there was no plane there. There was no engine. There were no people. There were actually no bodies recovered. And as the coroner said, basically, whoever body parts those were, they were dead, long dead body parts strewn about to make it look like some people died.
It's just another big fat lie from this government.
And early on, see, the Truth Movement took, they tried to coordinate all of the videos and everything everybody had, and then they disappear. The Truth Movement wasn't there to basically create a new 911 investigation. It was there to hide the trail.
Yeah, grab your materials that you were bringing forward and put them away so nobody could see them.
There was, from the beginning, a video that was released by someone who worked in an airport that showed the plane that supposedly crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, with the number on the plane pulled up to a warehouse, basically at an airport. They all deboarded and went inside the warehouse. Then we have the fake telephone calls from that plane, which couldn't have happened because of its altitude.
I mean, really, wasn't that the first thing you thought of when you heard all these phone calls on a plane? I'm going, how did they do that? My cell phone doesn't work when I'm on a plane. This was just madness. This is a false flag. And remember, people, that people can die during false flag operations. False flag doesn't mean that people don't die. This was the biggest false flag ever perpetrated on U.S. soil. And if you're still buying the government narrative, you need to take a big glass of water with some red pills and get real. That was a false flag. The Flight 93 was a false flag. And then the Pentagon. That wasn't a plane that flew in the Pentagon. I mean, my goodness, a regular average American can see that's not a plane.
Oh, that is just pathetic. But also with the telephone calls.
Yeah.
Anyone, go back and listen to any of them. They're all fake. This is what happened. They deboarded those passengers. They brought them in. They had each one of them read a page. Words were on the page that they took, and with a computer constructed those conversations. Listen to the conversations. There's no personal nothing. They identify themselves to their own husband's recording device. They are calm. They're all fake, okay? And then the Pentagon, the Pentagon was the worst of all. No plane can fly that low without cavitating and the wings falling off. Impossible. Not possible. Any pilot will tell you that. Look at the hole. It didn't even have a place where the wings were.
Look where it hit. It hit right there in the Office of Naval Intelligence.
Which was the number one group going after the $2.3 trillion missing dollars from the Pentagon, which is where they hid the Brady bonds, which is where they hid some of this, the gold, CIA rogue gold that they were
It was a strategic strike to wipe out all of that information.
They had this is amazing, they had just reinforced that section and only that section of the Pentagon. And they had just called the people back in there, the people from the Naval Intelligence Service, and almost every one of them was there. The person that I read the best report from had just gone out to get them all coffee. And they were all there in their new offices, all reinforced when it happened. And those were the people who had the very evidence that was being used by the FBI that had its two offices in the first tower that was hit. So this was directly connected. Now, you see no engine at the Pentagon. The hole isn't big enough for a plane. You see no body parts. The light posts and the wires and everything, no plane.
Well, what about the people that were killed inside the Pentagon?
They were the ones who had the evidence.
I know, but you would have seen the body parts of the people inside
that they
the
had.
building. I was just clarifying.
Sorry, I mean no bodies from the plane, from a supposed plane. And now we get to see some missing frames of a security camera that someone never turned in. And what it shows is a very, very low-flying small craft that seems to have fired a missile from it and either then took off or then ran into the building itself. But it could have been a very small thing. But for some reason, it needed to shoot a small missile ahead of itself, probably to create the hole so it would look...
No, because they need to strike that office.
And they needed to kill those people, correct. But what I'm saying is they needed to make it look like it could have been a scene where this plane had crashed. But there was no wings, there were no turbine engines, there were no people who were on the plane. And basically, anyone can look at that and see that's nonsense. But another one I want to point out is that even after the first plane hit the towers, the head chief of, I forget which ladder group it was, but their chief was actually leading the group up the steps. They finally made it to the floor where the plane hit. He goes into the floor, And he's reporting on his radio at that moment, and he states, "There is no problem. I have water below. We will be able to put this out immediately. There are no survivors. There are no body parts. And the flame is contained." Then he says, "Wait, what's that?" And you can hear what sounds above and below him, boom, 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 and then he's gone. In other words, those are the explosions in the controlled demolition. But he literally said, the chief of the fire department that first made it to that floor said the fire was contained. Okay, that fire was supposed to be burning up and bringing on the building. The fire was contained on the floor where the fire, supposedly, the jet fuel was supposed to create such heat. Let's remember that building was coming down because asbestos was wrapped around all of the outer steel struts that supported it. And in the inside was the largest amount of poured concrete in any building ever made. Both those buildings, I was there when they were built and I watched them carefully. I love those buildings and I'm so sorry for what happened that day. But I can tell you one thing. Those buildings were built to withstand 3 727 striking them at one time without falling. That was the intent of the engineering, and they were considered the marvel of the world when they were built. It is impossible for a plane to have knocked those buildings down either struck by force or by fire. It's impossible that a plane hit the Pentagon, and it is impossible to attribute what happened in Shanksville to a plane disaster.
Because it was not a big fat lie where people died. And it was perpetrated by the U.S. government, the White House, Bush, Cheney, the neocons, and it was covered up by Mueller, Comey, and the rest that we've mentioned. And these people still walk among us today. They are still enemies of we the people, and now they're running some Russia operation. I mean, talk about conspiracy theories. Put a tinfoil on that man's head and cut his Twitters off. I don't think he tweets, but I mean, this is just ridiculous. At what point are we just all as a people going to wake up and put an end to this nightmare, Thomas?
It's the same group of 36 people, and they've been doing this since the early 90s. Every time we research and we hit the bottom ground of criminality and find the evidence,
same people.
It's the same group of people.
Same people. Boy, won't it be great when we get them all locked up in Gitmo. Okay, so 17 years since September 11th, and then again, another remembrance to September 11th. These are tweets. And then finally, a tweet you didn't see, Thomas. You can talk about 9/11, but the final tweet was a headline from Breitbart, which says, "Small business optimism soars to its highest level yet."
We have historic success in the presidency and historic attacks and a coup d'etat, which continues to this day. But the good news is that we wanted to show you that the same criminals that created 911 and were there, Comey, Comey was the Department of Justice U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. John Brennan was in charge of the CIA Terrorist Analysis Group. And Robert Mueller had appendicitis. And then when he came to work, he didn't notice any crimes happened on 911. So what we're saying